The nose and nasal cavity are the major entrance and exit for the respiratory system. In addition to functioning as passageways, they also function to warm, humidify, and cleanse incoming air. In addition, the nasal cavity also functions in olfaction to sense odors. Each nostril opens to the nasal vestibule, which is a small chamber that houses hairs to filter and cleanse the air from dust and debris. The nasal vestibule expands to form the nasal cavity. The cavity itself is lined with olfactory epithelium for the sense of smell, which contains sensory cells and olfactory nerves. The nasal cavity warms and humidifies incoming air, as dry air in the lungs will dry out the respiratory membrane and it'll reduce its effectiveness for gas exchange between the air and the blood. The nasal conchae are structures within the nasal cavity that make incoming air more turbulent so that it mixes. The frontal and sphenoidal sinuses are nasal sinuses, which are also called the paranasal sinuses, that warm incoming air and also act as resonance chambers for speech. The hard and soft palates separate the nasal cavity from the oral cavity. The hard palate is made of bone, while the soft palate is made of skeletal muscle. The hard and soft palates permit us to continue breathing while we chew our food. The uvula, which is part of the soft palate, functions to close the nasal cavity off from the throat and the pharynx when swallowing. Figure 22.4 examines the major structures of the nasal cavity. The sphenoidal and frontal sinuses are paranasal sinuses that are found in the sphenoid and frontal bones, respectively. These serve as chambers to warm and humidify incoming air and act as resonance chambers for speech. The paranasal sinuses collectively reduce the weight of the skull as well. The nasal vestibule typically contains hairs that filter dust and debris from the air, although they are not shown in this diagram. The vestibules expand to become the nasal cavity. The lateral walls of the cavity are lined with the nasal conchae, which project from the walls of the nasal cavity and increase the surface area of the nasal cavity mucosa and make the incoming air more turbulent so that the air mixes. This will help to warm and humidify that incoming air in addition to allowing the sensory cells and the nerves of the mucosa to detect odors. The hard and soft palate form the physical border between the nasal cavity and the oral cavity. The hard palate is constructed from two pairs of bones, the maxilla and the palatine bones, while the soft palate is composed of skeletal muscle. The uvula is a small lobe of muscle that hangs inferiorly from the posterior side of the soft palate. The soft palate and the uvula close off the nasal cavity from the rest of the pharynx when swallowing so that foods or drinks do not move upward into the nasal cavity. The pharynx is a passageway that continues from the nasal cavity. It is a passageway that is formed from skeletal muscles and mucous membranes. Because it is a muscular structure, it has the tendency to collapse during the pressure changes that occur as air moves into or out of the lungs, especially when sleeping. This can disrupt normal breathing cycles. The pharynx consists of three regions: the nasopharynx, which is a passageway for only air, and thus it is a respiratory system structure. The remaining two regions of the pharynx are shared passageways for both the digestive and respiratory systems. The oropharynx is a passageway for both air and food, although typically not at the same time, and is found towards the posterior side of the oral cavity. The laryngopharynx is the inferior-most region of the pharynx. It is also a passageway for both food and air. It branches anteriorly to enter the larynx, which is a respiratory system structure, and branches posteriorly to enter the esophagus, which is a digestive system structure. Figure 22.6 examines the regions of the pharynx. The nasopharynx is situated between the nasal cavity and the oropharynx. The oropharynx is located between the nasopharynx and the laryngopharynx. And finally, the laryngopharynx is the region of the pharynx that is located between the larynx and the esophagus. When the larynx is closed during swallowing, food is directed distally into the esophagus.